Hollywood is known for its glitter, its flashing lights, and its endless pursuit of fame. But quietly, away from the cameras, something unexpected is happening. Some of the world's most famous stars, people who could live anywhere on Earth, are choosing the Philippines. Not for the spotlight, not for luxury, but for peace, belonging, and something deeper than success. In small towns like Siargao, Palawan, and Tagaytay, they walk barefoot, sip local coffee, and speak words of gratitude in Tagalog. Here they are not celebrities. They are neighbors, friends, and seekers of a life that feels real. This isn't a story about escape. It's about rediscovery, and it begins with a moment that no headline ever caught. A few months ago, something small stirred online, something that never reached the glossy covers of magazines or the breaking news tickers in Los Angeles. It started with a single post on a quiet fan blog, almost hidden among the noise of celebrity gossip. The story was simple. A well-known American actor, famous for tough guy roles in blockbuster films, had been spotted inside a church in Bohol. There were no bodyguards, no paparazzi, no grand entrance. Just him sitting quietly in the pews during Sunday Mass. Locals noticed his eyes were wet with tears, his head bowed in silence. After the service, someone gently asked what had moved him so deeply. He answered with words that stayed with everyone who heard them. "I've been to hundreds of churches. None felt like this." That moment never trended on social media, but it traveled quietly, like a whisper carried across islands. It wasn't about fame, or scandal, or a new movie release. It was about peace, connection, and something he hadn't found anywhere else. And he wasn't alone. That one encounter was the spark, a spark that would grow into something bigger, something Hollywood itself could never script. For years, Clara was everywhere. She was the face on billboards, the darling of red carpets, and the name that tabloids couldn't stop printing. In her 20s, she was celebrated as Hollywood's sweetheart. In her 30s, she became the center of scandals. Every misstep captured, every word twisted. And then, one day, she disappeared. No farewell interviews, no stage final appearance, just silence. People speculated, rehab, breakdown, retirement. But the truth was quieter. Clara had been watching from afar as a close friend shared photos from a trip to the Philippines. She saw unguarded smiles, barefoot walks through rice fields, and evenings that looked more like freedom than exile. Something in those images pulled at her, so she booked a flight under an alias, carrying nothing but a backpack and her doubts. When she landed in Manila, she didn't head for luxury resorts. She boarded a bus to the north, toward Banao's ancient rice terraces. The ride was long, 8 hours, one flat tire, and plenty of moments where she wondered if she was out of her mind. But when she finally stood before the green stairways carved by generations, something inside her broke open. No fans, no flashes, no selfies demanded, just a tired traveler in muddy sneakers, standing in silence. For the first time in decades, Clara felt invisible and free. Her journey didn't stop there. She drifted from Batangas to Bohol, from Bukidnon's rolling hills to Dumaguete's quiet coastlines. In Dumaguete, she found herself renting a modest home under the shade of acacia trees. Life slowed. Her landlady taught her how to cook sinigang. Neighbors invited her to Bible studies in Visayan, and Clara started writing letters. Not to the press, not to directors, but to herself. Letters about healing, forgiveness, and the kind of life she'd almost forgotten was possible. Days turned into months. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was becoming someone who laughed with neighbors instead of cameras, someone who could walk the market without makeup and still be recognized not as Clara the star, but as Clara the neighbor. One morning, she visited a small community on the edge of Negros. Mothers worked long hours, raising children with little support. Clara listened to their stories, and something stirred again. This time, not for herself, but for them. Quietly, she began funding a community center for single mothers. No press releases, no charity galas, just quiet help, given with heart. For Clara, the Philippines wasn't an escape from Hollywood. It was a return to humanity, to belonging, to herself. Michael was never the one in front of the camera, but his words shaped some of Hollywood's most unforgettable films. His scripts, Sharp comedies, raw monologues, emotional stories had brought studios millions and actors awards. To the world, he was a success, but to Michael, the applause had grown hollow. Every draft felt like a transaction. Every line he wrote was edited, reshaped, sold. Somewhere along the way, he lost the voice that once made him fall in love with writing. Then fate stepped in. A typhoon shifted his flight path, forcing him into an unexpected layover in Cebu. He arrived tired, frustrated, and ready to leave as soon as possible. But hunger pulled him into a small, hole-in-the-wall eatery near the terminal. There, a woman named Marissa served him a steaming bowl of arroz caldo. She smiled, called him Sir Mike, without knowing who he was, and gently refused the extra payment he tried to offer. After he finished, she even walked him 2 blocks to make sure he didn't get lost. It was such a simple act. No one asking for a selfie, no one negotiating for more. Just kindness, unguarded and real. For Michael, that moment cut deeper than any award speech ever had. He never boarded his next flight. Instead, he found a modest apartment above a sari store in Liloan. The walls were thin, the electricity sometimes flickered out, but none of that mattered. For the first time in 20 years, he picked up his pen not to meet a deadline, not to pitch, not to please, but just to write. He sat at a wooden desk by the window, listening to children laughing in the streets, and the words flowed again. Honest, untamed, his own. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Michael blended into the rhythm of the town. He'd buy bread in the morning from the bakery next door, join neighbors for karaoke nights, and chat with tricycle drivers about the best spots for Halo Halo. Nobody cared about his Hollywood resume. To them, he was just Mike, the guy upstairs who liked coffee a little too strong. And slowly, the joy of storytelling returned. Not as a career, not as a commodity, but as a gift. Michael began offering free creative writing classes for out-of-school youth in Cebu. He rented a small room, filled it with notebooks and pencils, and welcomed anyone curious enough to learn. The kids came, timid at first, then eager. He told them, "Your stories matter. Don't write for money, don't write for fame. Write because you have something to say." The irony wasn't lost on him. In Hollywood, he had once been the man behind other people's voices. In Cebu, he finally found his own. Michael didn't need premieres or contracts anymore. He needed mornings filled with the smell of arroz caldo, afternoons teaching kids who reminded him why words matter, and nights when the hum of the electric fan was the only sound in the room. In the Philippines, Michael didn't just rediscover his voice, he rediscovered himself. Ethan was the man Hollywood called when things needed fixing. A producer behind the scenes, he kept chaotic shoots together, smoothed over egos, and delivered blockbuster after blockbuster. He had the lifestyle that others dreamed of: premieres, sports cars, a home in the hills. But somewhere between the endless flights and the hollow parties, everything blurred. Luxury no longer felt like living. It felt like a cage with softer walls. He brushed off the emptiness until one night in Bangkok, during a late shoot, a Filipino cinematographer mentioned Siargao. "Go there," he said. "You'll feel something." Ethan laughed, nodded politely, and went back to his spreadsheets. But the words stuck. 2 months later, burned out and searching for anything, he booked a flight. In Siargao, Ethan didn't find luxury. He found life. A tricycle driver refused to overcharge him, calling him a guest. A family in Davao invited him to Christmas dinner after meeting him in a cafe. Children waved at him not because he was famous, they didn't even know who he was, but because he was simply there. He stayed for a week, then a month. And when his return ticket expired, he didn't rebook it. Instead, he bought a modest 2-bedroom home near the sea. No assistants, no alarm clocks. Just waves, salt air, and mornings that felt like healing. At first, his friends from Hollywood thought it was a phase, but then they visited. Directors, actors, costume designers, even a stuntman. They came curious, left transformed. Around Ethan's small table, over bowls of sinigang and nights of karaoke, they asked, "How do you live like this?" Ethan would only smile. "It's not about safety," he said. "It's about soul." The move wasn't just personal. Ethan built a second home in a quiet barangay where carabaos wandered past the yard. He didn't hire a construction company. Instead, neighbors, an Emmy-winning director, and even that Vancouver costume designer helped carry the wood. They worked side by side, celebrated with LaShawn, and sang under the stars when the house was done. No champagne, just family, found in the unlikeliest of places. Inspired by the community, Ethan began funding scholarships for local kids. It wasn't charity for headlines. It was gratitude. He often thought back to an old man who sold Tahoe and called him anak, son. That simple word reminded Ethan that he wasn't an outsider anymore. He belonged. Ethan had built sets all his life, controlled, temporary illusions. But in the Philippines, he built something real. A home, a family, and a life he never thought he'd find. What began with Ethan didn't stay with Ethan. Quietly, without fanfare, others followed. Word spread not through tabloids or interviews, but through late-night phone calls, whispered stories, and visits that changed lives. Hollywood names began arriving in the Philippines, not as celebrities looking for headlines, but as people looking for belonging. They came barefoot, blending into markets and town plazas, learning how to say apo and salamat with awkward accents that made locals smile. They weren't here to escape politics or dodge taxes. They were here to remember what it felt like to be human. One of them was Paul, a cowboy of the old TV days. His face had once filled living rooms across America. Decades later, gray-haired and almost forgotten by the industry that made him, he found his way to Laguna. Locals knew him simply as Kuya Paul, a neighbor who volunteered at the chapel, someone who fixed chairs before Sunday Mass. It wasn't until a tricycle driver's son stumbled across a vintage clip on YouTube that anyone realized who he truly was. When asked why he stayed, Paul just shrugged and said, "Here, I get to be me, and that's more than I ever hoped for." It wasn't a movement anyone declared, but it grew all the same. Stars, screenwriters, producers, people once trapped by red carpets and expectations, were planting roots in small barangays and fishing towns, teaching, building, giving. They weren't running from the world. They were running towards something the world had taken from them: stillness, laughter, the instinct to care without calculation. In the glow of string lights on a beach in Siargao, an actress once chased by paparazzi whispered what many of them felt: "I haven't felt this human in years." The Philippines doesn't dazzle with glitter. It humbles with heart. It's the neighbor who brings you a bowl of lugao on a rainy night, the child who calls you Taito after a week, the stranger who gives up their bus seat without hesitation. These aren't grand gestures for cameras. They're everyday acts of kindness woven into the fabric of life here. For those burned out by fame, it's everything. In Hollywood, applause is loud but fleeting. Here, the silence is steady, filled with the laughter across dinner tables, prayers whispered in chapels, and conversations that don't need to be translated to be felt. That's why stars aren't just passing through. They're planting roots. Some fund small film schools in Baguio. Others give birth in Iloilo hospitals. A few adopt entire communities, not as projects, but as family. They aren't performing anymore. They're living. And the lesson they've carried back isn't about beaches or sunsets. It's about values, family, faith, generosity, the unspoken belief that life is less about what you have and more about who you share it with. In a world that spins too fast, the Philippines offers stillness. Not a vacation, not a headline, but a mirror, reflecting what's raw, what's real, what's been missing. For Clara, Michael, Ethan, and countless others, this is where their souls finally exhaled, where they found peace not in applause, but in belonging. And in that quiet rebirth, they discovered something Hollywood could never give them: a place to feel human again.